Welcome to your deep dive. We're here to cut through the complexity and give you, well, the core takeaways from some really radical philosophical thinking.
And today, we're diving deep into agential realism. It's this framework that honestly starts with quantum physics, but ends up challenging, pretty much everything we think about reality, how we know things, even ethics.
Right. Our mission really is to show you why this kind of shift in thinking might actually be necessary.
We'll trace it back, actually, to a pretty dramatic historical moment. You might have heard of it. The 1941 meeting in Copenhagen, Nazi-occupied Copenhagen.
Between Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, yeah, Nobel Prize winners meeting under really intense circumstances.
Absolutely. And there's all this secrecy around whether they discussed a German atomic bomb.
Right.
It's fueled speculation for, gosh, decades.
There's that famous play, Copenhagen, right? It uses the uncertainty principle as sort of an analogy for understanding Heisenberg.
Exactly. It asks, can we ever really know what Heisenberg intended? But here's the catch, and this is crucial for what we're discussing today. The sources we're looking at point out that this psychological uncertainty, the playwright's idea, it relies on a philosophical assumption that agential realism just throws out. The idea of the separate, self-contained individual. The play kind of assumes Heisenberg had a fixed intent, but maybe we just can't see it clearly because, history is messy.
Like our observation messes things up.
Right. But the real debate between Bohr and Heisenberg, the physics debate, wasn't just about us messing things up. It went deeper. It was about the nature of reality itself, the nature of being.
Okay, so let's pivot from the historical drama, fascinating as it is, and get into the actual physics interpretations. Because this difference, what's knowable versus what's real, that seems to be the bedrock here.
It really is. So the version most people encounter, often linked to Heisenberg, is the uncertainty principle. Think of this mainly as an epistemic issue.
Epistemic meaning about knowledge.
It's exactly about the limits of our knowledge. The idea is something like an electron does have definite position and momentum before we look. It's just that the act of measuring one property inevitably disturbs the other one, so we can't know both perfectly.
So it's a limitation on us. Our measurement tools are clumsy, basically.
Kind of, yeah. The object itself is thought to be definite. But Bohr's interpretation, what's called the indeterminacy principle, is radically different.
How so?
Bohr flips the script. He says it's not a knowledge problem, it's an ontological one. It's about being.
Okay.
For Bohr, properties like position or momentum, they aren't definite before the measurement. They are fundamentally indeterminate.
So they don't exist in a specific state until we measure them.
That's the core idea.
Yeah.
The measurement process doesn't just reveal a pre-existing state that was hidden from us. It actually resolves the indeterminacy. It makes the property definite.
Wow. Okay, that really does challenge how we usually think. If things aren't definite until measured, doesn't that make reality totally dependent on us observing it, like subjective idealism?
That's the immediate worry, right? Does the moon only exist when we look? But Bohr has an answer for that.
Yeah.
And it involves the measuring device, the apparatus.
Oh, the apparatus, okay.
He argued that the interaction between whatever you're measuring in your measuring device, it's inherently discontinuous and sort of entangled. You can't draw a clean line, an unambiguous boundary between the object you're studying and the agencies of observation, the apparatus itself.
So you can't separate the observer and the observed cleanly?
Not in any inherent pre-given way, no.
Yeah.
The physical setup, the concepts you're using, the whole apparatus forms this kind of non-dualistic whole with the phenomenon it's measuring.
A non-dualistic whole, meaning they aren't two separate things interacting, but one entangled system.
Precisely. And if the apparatus and the object are inseparable like that, then that classic, rigid, distinction subject-observing object, it just collapses.
And the boundary we do perceive...
Bohr's insight, which leads straight to agential realism, is that the boundary isn't found, it's enacted. The measurement practice makes the cut.
Okay, this is huge. Let's unpack agential realism using this insight. If we can't separate the world from how we study it, tools, concepts, even our own bodies, then those old dualisms have to go.
Right. Nature versus culture, mind versus body. Crucially, epistemology versus ontology, knowing versus being. They're not separate domains.
So how does agential realism deal with that?
It introduces a combined term, onto-epistemology.
Onto-epistemology. One word.
One word. Because knowing and being are fundamentally entangled. And this isn't just, fancy academic talk. It's the realization that our practices of making knowledge, the experiments we run, the theories we build, the way we talk about things, these are social and material actions.
And they contribute to reality.
They literally contribute to and are part of the very reality we're trying to understand. Knowing is a material practice that shapes what is.
Okay, if our knowledge practices shape reality, then how we think about cause and effect must change too. We usually think of interaction, right? Like separate things bumping into each other.
Exactly. Interaction assumes you have these pre-existing independent entities. Think billiard balls colliding. Agential realism says, no, that's not fundamental. The key concept is interaction.
Interaction. Okay, different prefix. What's the difference?
Interaction means the things in relation, the relata, they don't exist before the relationship. They actually emerge through their specific entanglement.
Can you give an example?
Think of maybe two streams merging to form a river. The distinctiveness of each stream and the river itself, they emerge through the process of merging. They define each other within that dynamic process, that interaction. The entities emerge within the phenomena.
So things don't pre-exist their relations? The interactions come first, in a sense?
In a very real sense, yes. Relata emerge through interactions.
So if reality isn't made of fixed, separate things, but these emerging entities within interactions, what is the basic stuff of reality then, in this view?
Reality is made of phenomena. And a phenomenon, in this framework, is the ontological inseparability of the object and the agencies of observation, the apparatus. Phenomena are the primary unit. Things only exist as things in phenomena.
Always relationally constituted. Okay. But if everything is fundamentally entangled within phenomena, how do we ever get clarity? How does science, or even just daily life, manage to distinguish things? We seem to make distinctions all the time.
Right. We need distinctions to make sense of the world, and that's where the concept of the agential cut comes in.
An agential cut. What does that do?
The cut isn't about discovering some natural boundary that was already there. It's an enactment. It's a specific material practice carried out by the whole apparatus arrangement.
And this enactment, it resolves the indeterminacy.
Yes. Within the phenomenon, it resolves the inherent indeterminacy and draws a line. It delineates what counts as the measured object and what counts as the measuring agency for that specific situation.
Can you give a non-physics example, maybe?
Sure. Think about jury trial. The legal process, the courtroom, the lawyers, the evidence presented, the rules of law, the jury's deliberation. That whole setup is the apparatus.
Okay.
When the jury declares someone guilty or not guilty, that declaration is an agential cut. It enacts a distinction, a specific status that wasn't inherent before the process. It defines the person in relation to the law in that moment. It stabilizes the phenomenon.
Got it. So the cut isn't finding a pre-existing truth, but making a distinction, drawing a boundary through a practice. And that gives things stability, makes them understandable, at least temporarily.
Exactly. It's crucial for intelligibility.
Now let's ground this more. You mentioned the apparatus is key. Agential realism talks about the material discursive apparatus. Let's break that down, material and discursive.
Right. It means we have to think about the physical stuff, the actual equipment, the bodies involved, the material constraints, and the discursive stuff, the concepts, the language, the cultural meanings, the rules, the norms, as completely inseparable. They both shape the apparatus and what it does.
So it's not just the machine, it's the whole context, including the ideas.
Absolutely. And the sources mention how important it was for developing these ideas to actually handle old physics equipment, to get a feel for the physicality of it, how ideas are literally built into the machines, something you miss if you only do theory.
That makes sense. And there's a fantastic story that really highlights this material aspect, right? The Stern-Gerlach experiment. The one that showed electron spin.
Oh yeah, the cigar story. It's brilliant. So the textbook version is all clean physics. Silver atoms splitting in a magnetic field. Very elegant.
But the reality was messier.
Much messier. Apparently the experiment only worked consistently, got that clean split, because one of the scientists smoked these really cheap cigars. The cheap cigars had a high sulfur content in the smoke. And that sulfur reacted somehow, maybe coating part of the apparatus, in just the right way to make the beam stable or the detection work properly.
No way. So the cigar smoke was actually part of the effective apparatus.
Yes. The cigar, the smoke, the scientists have it. This whole kind of contingent, messy situation was crucial. It shows that apparatuses aren't these static controlled things. They're dynamic, open-ended, material discursive practices.
That's a perfect illustration. And this idea applies to modern tech too, like microscopy.
Definitely. Take the scanning tunneling microscope, the STM. It lets us see individual atoms.
Yeah.
But how? Experts who use it often describe the process less like passive seeing, like taking a photo.
And more like
More like engaging the sense of touch.
touch. How does that work?
Imagine like someone who's blind using a cane. They tap it, drag it, feel the vibrations, and build up a mental image of the surface based on that active tactile feedback. The STM works similarly, with a tiny probe interacting with the atomic surface.
So representing reality, even at the atomic level, isn't just getting a reflection. It's an active, skillful physical engagement, a practice involving touch and interaction, or rather, intra-action.
Precisely. It's a practice. And this extends beyond the lab into big social systems. Consider, say, 3D ultrasound in pregnancy.
Okay, the medical imaging.
The apparatus there isn't just the transducer wand and the screen, it's the whole material discursive setup.
Meaning the hospital setting?
Yeah, the hospital, the protocols, the technician's training, the legal definitions of fetal personhood, cultural ideas about motherhood, what doctors are allowed or expected to say.
Yeah.
All of that is part of the apparatus.
And this whole apparatus interacts with the pregnant person and the fetus.
Right. It doesn't just passively look at a pre-existing reality inside the womb. It actively participates in producing the body, the fetus's image, the mother as patient. It makes certain things visible, others invisible. It enacts cuts.
It performs an agential cut that helps define what counts as human or viable in that specific medical and social context.
Wow. The cuts are everywhere, shaping our reality.
Yeah.
And because of this, Agential Realism suggests we need a better metaphor for thinking and knowing than the old one. Reflection.
Reflection, like a mirror. Yeah, that implies we're just getting a copy of reality from a distance, a passive copy.
Exactly. Sameness, separation. The viewer detached from the viewed, like a spectator. Agential Realism says that's misleading. It proposes diffraction instead.
Diffraction, like light waves bending around an object.
Yeah, that's the physics phenomenon. When waves diffract, they interfere with each other, creating patterns, interference patterns. It's about how differences interact and produce effects.
Okay, so how does diffraction work as a method for thinking, as an alternative to reflection?
Well, reflection looks for sameness, for accurate copies. Diffraction, as a method, is about looking at how different things, ideas, phenomena, texts, scientific findings, social movements are entangled, how they sort of read through each other.
Reading through each other?
Yet how their interaction or interaction produces specific patterns, specific differences. It focuses on the effects of difference. It pays attention to the specific material connections, the interrelations.
So instead of asking if something is a true reflection, you ask, how did these different elements come together to produce this specific outcome?
Exactly. How are differences produced? How do they matter? And for whom?
So if you were analyzing, say, a news report using diffraction,
Instead of just asking, does this report accurately reflect reality, which assumes a separate reality to be reflected,
right?
you'd ask, what specific material discursive apparatus produced this report? What were the constraints, the funding model, the algorithms, the sources used, the political climate, the journalistic norms? How did all that interact to generate this particular version of events, highlighting these differences and not others?
Okay, so it shifts the focus from just true or false to the whole generative process. How did this particular reality get stabilized and presented?
Precisely. It helps you see how seemingly separate things like science and society are actually deeply entangled. They have this relationship of what the source calls exteriority within. They shape each other from the inside, as it were.
And this obviously has ethical implications. It ties knowledge directly to accountability, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Diffraction isn't a distanced, neutral analysis. It's a critical practice of engagement. Because if we are part of the phenomena we study, if our knowledge practices help shape reality, then we have a responsibility.
A responsibility for the cuts we make, the differences we highlight or ignore.
Yes, it demands we ask which differences matter, how do they matter, and for whom. It's about understanding our role in the world ongoing creation.
So let's try to summarize the core challenge Agential Realism poses. It seems to fundamentally redefine, well, matter itself.
It really does.
Yeah.
Matter isn't some fixed inert substance just sitting there. It's not just a thing. Matter is a doing.
A doing.
Yeah, a dynamic process. It's the ongoing activity of stabilizing and destabilizing, of iterative interactivity. Matter is understood as the ongoing materialization of phenomena. The substance and the process are one.
Okay, so the big takeaway for us, for you listening, What's the profound lesson here, tracing back from quantum physics through agential realism?
I think the deepest lesson is that we are fundamentally part of the nature, the reality that we seek to understand. We aren't outside observers looking in.
Knowing isn't something that happens just in our heads.
No. Knowing is a distributed practice. It's part of the world making itself intelligible to another part of the world. We are interacting participants in the world's becoming knowledgeable about itself.
And if agency isn't something an individual has, but something that emerges from interacting,
Right, if agency is an enactment.
and those interactions determine what's real and what's possible, then ethics changes too.
It has to. Ethical accountability can't just be about individual human intentions anymore, because intentions are only part of the entangled picture. It has to be about the consequences of our entangled materializations, the cuts we enact collectively.
Which leaves us, and you, with a pretty provocative final thought to chew on.
Go for it.
If the boundaries we rely on between ourselves and the world, between knowing and reality, between nature and culture, if these aren't fixed but are constantly being performed, constantly being enacted through our practices, our technologies, our apparatuses, then how do we learn to interact responsibly in this ongoing shaping of what's real? How do we take responsibility for the world's becoming?